Well, greetings and salutations, everyone, and welcome to tonight's night ending bonus upload. Before we jump into it, a couple links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below, merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It doesn't cost you a cent. Click that like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go, and yes, folks, they do matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to tonight's night-ending bonus, shall we? Tonight's first encounter. This incident occurred during the winter of 1991 in Hillsborough County, Florida. My mom, one of my cousins, and I were traveling back from a school concert. At the time, we lived in a rural part of the county. We were about 3 miles from our house when my mom hits the brakes hard. I was in the back seat asleep, and my cousin was sleeping in the front passenger seat. I heard a hard thump, and then my mom hit the gas. I asked what happened, and she screams out, "I just hit a werewolf." My cousin's eyes are wide open, and she's not talking at all. My mom told me more details when we got home. Before she had hit it, she noticed a car on the side of the road up ahead. When she came up to it, the creature jumped right in front of her car. She was going about 45 miles an hour when she hits the brakes, and this creature lands on the hood of our car, its face landing on the windshield. It had black fur and red eyes, a long mouth open to reveal large teeth. Definitely not a guy in a suit. It pushed itself off the car, leaving claw marks on the hood. My mom told me that the last time there was one of these in the area had been over 20 years. I believe it was 2001. I was working maintenance at a factory, again in Hillsborough County. My shift was 10 p.m. till 4 a.m. For about a week, I started hearing these strange sounds coming from the back of the building, which was surrounded in thick brush, and not your typical animal sounds. One night, I heard a loud crash coming from the side entrance. I go and investigate and find a large garbage can was thrown on top of the roof and it rolled off. I'm thinking kids until I got a strong whiff of something nasty that was not garbage. Then I'm thinking skunk ape. I quickly pick up all the trash and go back into the building. The next night, I'm traveling between the two buildings when the thick brush starts shaking. I heard an animal make a horrible sound like it was being choked. I ran into the lighted parking lot and turned around, and I saw a large humanoid shape appear from the brush and then went back in. A couple of nights later, my mom is waiting to pick me up when she saw a large shape come in under the light by the side entrance. It suddenly noticed my mom and went back into the shadows. A week passes with no incident. Again, my mom is waiting to pick me up when she hears a couple of dogs bark close by. She turns and sees a large hooded man walking behind the car. He was across the parking lot on the side of the road. The dogs belonged to a couple of the trailer folk nearby. These dogs traveled in a pack of 4 and 5, weighing between 60 to 100 pounds. They were running around this guy, barking and snapping at him. One of the larger dogs got a hold of his arm. Then my mom saw this guy's face. It wasn't a man under that hood. The head of a black wolf became visible. This unearthly being shook and then threw the dog like a doll. The rest of the dogs ran for their lives. The hooded creature walked into a nearby woods. The next night was a full moon, and I heard its unearthly howl. We never heard or saw it again. Now a housing project occupies the land where it once lived. Tonight's second encounter. I thought I'd share my mom's experience. I'm going to start off by sharing that her home and my childhood home is definitely loaded with paranormal activity. My mom's home is situated in the middle of the Appalachian Mountains. She had one neighbor, her mother-in-law. There are no other houses around hers, just beautiful mountains. One night, her dog's barking and growling. She wouldn't stop. My mom was a tad confused as there were no outside noises that she could hear. But the dog kept pacing between the door and the windows. After an hour, she decides to grab the flashlight and go outside and make sure everything's okay, and that there were not any animals messing with the trash bins. She figured her dog had picked up the scent of a raccoon or some other nocturnal animal. She scanned the yard and the creek and didn't see anything out of place, no animals, and her trash had not been tipped over. As she turns back to go inside, that's when she saw it. I will give the best description that I can from her explanation, as I've never seen it myself, and I hope I never do. It was standing on its hind legs. Its back legs looked animal-like, and its front looked more human. It wasn't hairless, but it looked as if it had mange with long fur here and there. The top half looked like a humanoid man, while the lower half looked like an animal. She was standing there, paralyzed in fear, shining her light on it. It looked at her and then started walking on all fours out of her yard into the mountains. As it did, it stopped and looked back at her, then finally disappeared into the wilderness. Her second encounter wasn't that intense, but worth mentioning either way. It was weeks later when her dog began acting out again. She tries her best now to not go outside once the sun goes down. She turned the lights off inside and looked out the kitchen window. With the light from her yard, she was able to see into her backyard. Although it was further away from her and not as detailed, she said it was the same shape and look, and she knew instantly it was the same thing she saw weeks earlier. Chills ran down her spine. She said she closed her eyes and let go of the blinds so they'd close for what felt like several minutes, and when she opened her eyes back up and pulled open the blinds to look back out again, it was gone. She said it took everything in her to open those blinds back up and look back outside. For weeks following, she would shoot her gun off right at the edge of dark. Now, anytime the dog acts out, she scans the backyard, steps back onto the porch, with the door still open just in case, and shoots her gun off a couple of times. She has not encountered it again. This took place in eastern Kentucky and happened in the summer of 2019. I'll ask my mom later tonight if there were any other details in its appearance that I may have missed. It's been a while since I've brought it up to her, as it makes her scared come nightfall, and she'll call and keep me on the phone later than usual. Today's third encounter. This happened to my dad's family when he was a kid. I'm not too sure how old he was or the exact date this all happened, but I know that it was nighttime in the fall, sometime in the early 80s. My dad and his parents were on their way to Gallup, New Mexico to watch a movie. They were located in Zuni, New Mexico, and the drive to Gallup is 32 miles heading north. My grandfather was a forest ranger at the time and worked in the Zuni Mountains. He was using his ranger truck to get to town. Now I will tell you this incident mainly from my dad's perspective. He's the only person that's ever explained this to me. My grandmother is eerily bothered so much that she doesn't like talking about it. My grandfather is disassociative with the family, so I've never had a chance to ask. Anyway, they're about halfway to town. It's dark out. Large ponderosa trees cover both sides of the road. In the midst of driving, my grandfather stomped on his brakes. My grandma was sitting in the passenger seat and my dad in the back seat. At this moment, my dad's confused. He's facing toward the back window passenger side. He sees my grandfather quickly reach over the back seat and grab his rifle off the gun rack. Heard him open his door and fire a shot. My granddad hit it and it screamed. My dad now looks over the seat to see it running to the right side of the road, east, and it takes one large step over a cattle guard and disappears into the woods. They drive away and proceed to go to the movie without discussing anything about what happened. Now, my dad says, according to my grandmother and grandfather, that the Bigfoot was hairy, but not like you'd expect. Its hair was fringed and balding. They said it had pale blue skin and looked fatigued. When my grandfather shot it, it dropped its jaw for a couple of seconds. Its jaw dropping looked grotesque, like it couldn't have possibly made its mouth any wider. Then came the scream. The scream is the eeriest part. They all said they'll never forget it. It was loud, gross, and had meaning. After screaming, it lunged to the left or east, took a step over the cattle guard, and ran into the forest. The jaw-dropping is what makes my grandmother not talk about it. She says it's the scariest, most ugliest thing she has ever seen. Now, after they get back home, it started following my grandfather. That night, my grandfather got no sleep. My grandmother didn't either, and that's how she knows. She pretended to be asleep, but both of them heard things around the house that night. Movement, noise against the walls, and an overpowering feeling like something was out there in the dark. My granddad continued his work as a ranger, but soon quit, due to a constant run-in with this thing. When he was out in the forest, he knew it was watching. He could smell it. He heard its screams and would hear the knocks. It made disturbances in the road just for him. It would toss branches in the road to and from his destinations like it knew his schedule or where he had to be. It scared my granddad so much that he hasn't gone back since. And since then, it hasn't bothered him at all. All while this was happening, my granddad experienced one wild ride as a ranger. I believe he's seen UFOs, strange murders, and very odd occurrences, all in that forest. He's written down everything that's happened. It's in a binder at his house, and I really want to read it. My dad says he has, and it's nuts. But Gramps now has cancer and is shut in from it. Hopefully I'll get to see him soon, or get my hands on that book. Zuni is a true place of mystery. Weird stuff goes down there all the time. Tonight's fourth encounter. I grew up in rural Missouri. My family moved there in 1985 when I was a kid, about 15 to 20 minutes from the closest town, with the closest town being Wright City, Missouri, about 15 minutes north. It really was in the middle of nowhere. You'd have to drive a mile or two down one gravel road before you got to the gravel road I lived down. That was about a mile and a half long that only my family and our neighbor lived on. There was about 3,000 to 4,000 acres north of us that no one lived on, and about 1,000 acres south of us that no one lived on. It was all owned by the same guy, who only came out during deer season to hunt the property south of us and lived in a town about 20 miles west. The land north of us was mostly incredibly hilly forest with a few caves about a mile north of our house. The land south of us was about 50-50 woods to fields, with an old 100-year-old abandoned cabin deep in the woods. The old wagon road had grown up, and the property owner told us no one lived there since the 1800s. I had a few sightings while growing up there. I had always told myself it was Momo, the Missouri monster, Missouri's version of Bigfoot. Wasn't until I saw a trail cam photo of what was said to be the forest ghoul several years ago. This led me to do a little more research. First memorable sighting was when I was a teenager. Me, my brother, sister, and dad were playing a game I learned in Boy Scouts called Manhunt. It's basically a blend of hide and seek and tag. We'd set a boundary around the cedar thicket just north of the house. Me and my little brother were on a team against my dad and sister. Me and my brother would hide first, with my dad and sister eventually catching us. We then let my dad and sister hide and went to go find them. We ended up catching my sister, but we couldn't find my dad, so we started working together. The cedars were thick, and the sun was setting. We were probably in the last 10 minutes of daylight for the day. We want to catch our dad fast before we couldn't see anymore. We searched most of the area and didn't find him. Eventually, I spotted what looked like 2 feet, 20 to 30 feet in front of us. They were barefoot and pale. Not thinking much of it, I told my brother I thought Dad had taken his shoes off to be quiet. We spread out 20 feet apart, tried sneaking up on him from opposite sides, crouching the whole way so we could see under the cedar trees, because we couldn't see through the thicket. We got about 15 feet away before it realized we were coming up on it and took off. We both took off running after it, thinking it was my dad. We chased it to the edge of the thicket, where there is a small open glade before the start of a large forest that spread back into the hills. We yelled that he was running out of bounds, and as we got to the edge of the thicket, we noticed what appeared to be a pale, naked man jetting into the woods. This spooked the hell out of my brother and me, but we still wanted to believe that it was just Dad playing with us. So we ran the opposite direction, back south toward the house, only to see my dad sitting next to my sister by the pond, 100 yards across the field from the thicket. We asked Dad how he got over here so fast, and him and my sister told us that he'd been sitting here with her for 20 minutes, waiting for us to figure out that he wasn't in the woods. My brother and I tried to explain what we saw to him, but he blew it off, saying it was probably a deer. Meanwhile, we had chicken multiple times as growing up. Normally, they'd be fine in their chicken coop for months. Then something would start killing them, tearing open the wire fencing to the caged yard. Usually, we'd find 1 or 2 chickens torn up and laying in the yard. My mom and dad always said it was wild dog, but the chickens never looked eaten, just slaughtered. He always repaired the fencing, yet it kept happening. Usually once it started. During my senior year of high school, she decided to try chickens again. It was good at first. Then a couple of months later, they started getting killed again. This time, though, it was peeling off the wire roof of the caged yard. Cage was 5 to 6 feet tall. My dad said it was dogs, but the opening would normally be a few feet off the ground. I remember asking my dad at the point, saying, if it were dogs, wouldn't they try to dig under the fence and not go from the top? The slaughtering seemed to be worse than before, with the dead chickens being tossed all over the yard, yet just torn up, not eaten. My sister had gotten a pygmy goat that year and raised it for FFA. One day we found it dead and mutilated as well. It was in the stable yard on the side of our barn with a 6 to 7 foot fence around it, yet something had gotten in. My parents claimed it was dogs again. Then one night my sister's boyfriend was having a bonfire party. I went over there with my sister because my parents wouldn't let her go to the party without me. My sister got real drunk. I didn't get drunk much because I was too busy watching over her. I think I may have had a beer all night. We left late, maybe 1 or 2 in the morning. When we got home, I would park my truck in the yard next to the driveway, usually facing the chicken coop. I pulled in and my sister just started screaming and pointing. I looked up and saw what, at the time, I could only describe as what looked like Gollum from Lord of the Rings on the roof of the chicken coop. It was staring right at us, crouched down, just like Gollum normally was in the movies. Pale white. It had very, very thin hair on top of its head, probably less than Gollum had in the movies. And it had 2 red eyes that glowed in the headlights. It appeared to be hissing at us. I locked the doors, quieted my sister down, then started honking the horn and flashing between my brights and the regulars. Me and my sister were both freaking out. It jumped off the back of the chicken coop toward the direction of the woods north of the house, and we lost sight of it. My parents had turned the outside lights on at that point and were looking out the door. I grabbed my sister and ran as fast as I could inside with her. When I tried telling my parents what I saw, they refused to believe us. They told us we were drunk and full of crap. I tried telling them that I wasn't drunk, but they wouldn't believe me. Sadly, my sister was so drunk she didn't remember coming home. A few nights later, we were all gathered in the living room, getting ready to watch a movie we had rented from the video store. As we were watching the previews, we heard the chicken screaming. My dad was still convinced it was dogs, and had grabbed a loaded .30-30. He grabbed his spotlight, also near the door, and ran out back. A few moments after he went outside, we heard gunshots followed by continuous firing until he emptied the whole magazine. This was very unlike him. Growing up, he taught me and my brother that a good hunter only takes one shot at something. If you need two or more, you're not good enough for that shot. He even made us get our first kill with a single muzzle loader black powder rifle before we could even use a regular rifle. Never in my entire life had I seen or heard my dad unload a full mag at something. He charged back in, immediately told us kids to go and lock all the doors and windows of the house. He was white as a ghost. Meanwhile, he said he needed to talk to my mom. He took my mom into the back room and closed the door for 20 minutes. I already knew what it was. I was already scared before he even went outside. My brother and I and my sister waited in the living room until they got done talking. I asked him what he had seen, and he told me. He did not want to talk about it and not to bring it up again. The next day, he and my mom decided to slaughter all the chickens and wouldn't be getting any more. To this day, my dad will not talk about what he saw. Nowadays, acts like it never happened, plays stupid. I went off to college a couple months later, and I never saw it again after that. And tonight's final encounter. Two of my friends who are married and I are walking my family land. It's about 170 acres of heavily wooded with both pine and hardwood. Heavily trailed. It was dark, but my friends wanted to take me out walking on the trails. A couple of the neighbors' dogs followed us, a coonhound and a Great Pyrenees. We walked south and east to my camping area. We were hanging out at my camping spot when behind us, further back the trail we had come down, the dogs started acting strange. We're looking back, and then they came out of the woods to our left and stood on the trail. The Great Pyrenees started growling very low and looking defensive. The coonhound is a goofball, but he was also acting disturbed about something. They were both looking down the trail to the west. It immediately got quite strange and serious feeling, and a bit ominous. I've learned to trust my gut, which I recommend anyone to do while they're in the woods, or if around a person or animal that you feel instinctively is threatening. Anyway, I said to my friends, we better get back to the house. To get my point across, I sort of grimly added, now. Well, we were heading west on this trail, and the dogs, if I remember correctly, had vacated the area. While walking, I looked back and saw my one friend, the wife, looking into the woods off the trail, and staggered back a few steps. Her husband had walked ahead, and I asked what was wrong. By the way, this area where the dogs had previously been growling at, she said, I'll tell you when we get back. I don't want to scare him, her husband. He's kind of easily spooked. So we got back, and I asked her what she saw. She tells us that she felt she needed to look off the trail into the trees, and she saw something halfway behind a tree, looking at her. We all had headlamps on. She said it was a human-like palish white with oval head. It looked like it was crouching with long limbs. She kept stressing how skinny it was, particularly the limbs. She said it had a surprised look on its face, like it didn't expect us to be there. Myself, my friends, relatives use those trails regularly, but not at night. She said that the thing was bobbing back and forth in a creepy way. It moved its head behind the tree and then swayed its head and shoulders back rhythmically to look at her. She said it did not appear to be aggressive at that moment, but looked very scary. I pulled up the famous trail cam pic of the crawler or whatever. She had a shocked look on her face and nodded yes. However, she made it clear that it wasn't the same. The next night I'm on the porch and I hear this freaky, shrill scream come from those woods. I don't know if the two things are related, but I've lived in this county most of my life and I've never heard anything like it. This is one of the multiple things that have happened around here, but this is only one that I know of that involved this creature. This was in north central Alabama. All right, folks, just a quick little bonus upload to get us to the end of the night, hopefully into tomorrow. Guys, I'd like to thank you all for supporting the channel. Your support is what makes this channel continue to grow and go, and what makes it a place where people can share their ideas, theories, and experiences with zero ridicule, zero judgment, and simple respect. Thank you, everyone, for the community you have created in the comment section. With that being said, stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and friends. These creatures are real. They're out there and they're dangerous. Share this information with the people you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for the truth, and God bless.